The question is that grievances be noted, and I give the call to the member for Bruce.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I want to call out the egregious revelations over the last few weeks regarding the previous government's industrial-scale rorting of grants. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, we're partway through an audit committee inquiry into grants administration. Now, as the chair, I'm not going to pre-empt the recommendations, but the member for Dunkley here has been bearing witness to this nonsense that keeps emerging. But I do want to highlight the evidence. I really do. Billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars treated as if it was a Liberal Party slush fund. Billions of dollars with no guidelines, allocated with no proper process, secret decisions, secret criteria, and no records kept as to why decisions were made. Now, I'm not contesting the right of ministers to make these decisions, but they are subject to the Financial Management Act. They are subject to the grants guidelines. They say that ministers must receive written advice before making a decision, and they have to record the basis for their decisions. But the upshot is billions of dollars rorted for the Liberal Party. The most depressing thing, though, Deputy Speaker, is that no one is surprised by this anymore. That's a shameful and shocking thing for our country. And the second most depressing thing is they still don't understand that what they did was fundamentally wrong. They just come up with lines like, oh, well, you know, you're the government now, move on. We have to interrogate this and we have to learn the lessons. Now, I'll give you the example of the $4.8 billion Urban Congestion Fund. 83% of funding from this just happened to go to Liberal and National electorates. It's a Deirdre Chambers moment. Like, it's just a coincidence that there's only congestion in Liberal and National Party electorates. I don't think congestion only happens in their seats, Deputy Speaker. It included, of course, the infamous commuter car parks rorts, $656 million slush fund. 60% of that, though, went to Victoria. Apparently you didn't need commuter car parks in New South Wales or Brisbane or other states. But the interesting thing is, in the audit report, as we're inquiring into, that the department did some modelling and found out that most congestion in Melbourne, even if you just want to say, OK, we're pushing the funding into Melbourne, because Josh Frydenberg was worried about his seat. Turns out he was right on that front. But even if the modelling said most congestion's in the northwest of Melbourne, yet all the commuter car park funding went to the southeast. That's not a coincidence, because that's where the seats were that they were worried about. But there was no process. They didn't write to state and territory governments who run the transport infrastructure, didn't write to councils. It was just made up by Liberal MPs. Many in Josh Frydenberg's electorate of Kooyong. Now, speaking of Kooyong, it is more than car parks now. You'd think that big national projects were going to be funded by the $4.8 billion Urban Congestion Fund. I think you were the minister at one point, weren't you? That's right, yeah, very good minister. One that locked himself in rooms with no recommendations from public servants and wrote no records that the taxpayers— because I'm chair of the audit committee is how I'd know, because I read the audit reports and we've had your evidence in. There are no records kept of why you locked yourself in a room and made these decisions. Billions of dollars of taxpayer funding. The former Deputy Prime Minister, well, he was former Deputy Prime Minister once? Once, in the middle of the Barnaby episodes. But this project on the books in the electorate of Kooyong. Now, this was traffic lights, as I said.
I'd ask the member for Riverina to
You'll never be the Deputy Prime Minister of the country again. Now, even you'd reckon that the Urban Congestion Fund might be for big national things. They do shriek, don't they? When you talk about integrity in public administration, it sets them off. They just kind of yell and scream. Exactly what I said. I think it proves my point before, Deputy Speaker, that they still don't get that how they administered these funds was fundamentally wrong. They don't get it. It was legally wrong and it was ethically wrong. But $4.8 billion fund, it's funding a set of traffic lights at the intersection of Camberwell Road and Redfern and Monteith Streets. Now, they're two small side streets, member for Dunkley. The road is a state road, but it runs through some shops in Kooyong. One lane each way and on-street parking. Big national priority, this one. Two side streets are residential streets, just to make clear. It was announced in 2019 that the then government was going to give $1.8 million funding to this set of pedestrian lights. It was such an important national priority that they were going to 100% fund it from their slush fund. Well, they budgeted $1.6 million in the 1920 budget. No one ever answered the question where the other $200,000 went, but let's not argue about that. The tender's out this year, $3.6 million. It's double. It's just a coincidence, I'm sure, that it's the intersection out of Josh Frydenberg's former electorate office, isn't it? Just a coincidence. I mean, this is how they use taxpayer money, to hand out money to their mates and favours and then themselves outside their own electorate offices. Now, you'd think also for a national program of this scale there'd be some independent assessment of proposals maybe, you know. Here's a thought. Well, a fact. Just 2 of the projects out of the hundreds in the spreadsheets that we've got, hundreds of them, 2 of them were referred to Infrastructure Australia for assessment, the Napoleon Road upgrade and the Dorset Road upgrade. And what did Infrastructure Australia say about those? Well, I've got the business case evaluation summaries here, Deputy Speaker. They said, not recommended for the infrastructure priority list. That's what they say. I'm going to table. Would you like me to table them? Can I seek leave to table these documents?
You can seek leave to table the
documents.
Can I seek?
Is leave granted?
Is leave granted?
Well, yes, no.
Is leave granted?
No. Okay. All right. Yeah, I didn't think they'd want those in the record. But let's make clear.
Member for Bruce, can I just clarify that? Is leave granted?
Not granted.
Leave is not granted.
They don't want these facts on the parliamentary record. But Infrastructure Australia said they're not recommended for the infrastructure priority list. Now, on the Napoleon Road upgrade, they initially allocated $3.5 million towards this upgrade. Then Alan Tudge, the former member, this is one of those ones in Aston, he said they were going to fund $50 million, and yet actually that's $220 million short of what would be required to deliver the project. So they allocated $3.5 million, they announced a fake promise of $50 million, and they were going to need $270 million to deliver the project. Then there's a Dorset Road upgrade. That was $6.5 million they allocated. Tudge looks like he promised $80 million, although the department said no, they actually only pencilled in $50 million, but it would require another $120 million to deliver the project. Fake promises, but even the 2 they put through, even the ones they put through Infrastructure Australia were not recommended. But how were the $4.8 billion of projects chosen, Deputy Speaker, you may well ask? Well, no one will ever know. The department gave evidence on Friday. They had no idea. It was done by ministers. Only some states and territories got asked, like New South Wales, a Liberal state. Other states and territories didn't get asked for input or advice. But then there's the Regional Growth Fund, the $272.2 million slush fund. Full marks for trying, though. You did try and cover your tracks on this one. It was dressed up with they had process, they had guidelines, they had evaluations, but magically 96% went to coalition seats. The other 4% went to Lingiari, a seat you were trying to win off us. Didn't win it. But magically, in another Deirdre Chambers moment, $261 million, $181,392 versus $11. Now, they say the department assessed it. Well, yes, the department did assess these, and then they gave a list of 148 applications to the ministers and said, you choose. Why did they choose one over the other? Well, no one will ever know. Just a coincidence that 96% of it went to Liberal seats. It was for major transformational projects to deliver long-term economic growth and create jobs in the regions. There was a whole lot of sporting facilities. There was even one in the Casey electorate, Deputy Speaker, on the edge of Melbourne. In fact, most of the voters in Casey live in a metropolitan area. Some of the funding went into a metropolitan area, but that should not be a surprise because, as the Auditor-General observed, over 3.5 years, 26% of their so-called regional development funding went to major capital city postcodes. 26%. I mean, most of that, you're right, you couldn't apply for, like the infamous North Sydney pool, apparently a regional development project. There was no requirement for benefit-cost ratios on this. The committee got the documents. It was a slush fund dressed up as a grants program. Deputy Speaker, this cannot be normalised. I'll just close by reading a couple of quotes from submitters. From the RDA committee from the Northern Territory, they said, the BBRF became increasingly known for being a funding program marred by political influence. From a long-term now consultant, he said, the real point is that in the last few years of the previous government was a void of policy across almost every area. In my 43 years of working across 3 levels of government, I've never before seen such a lack of policy depth across an entire government. He said the sad thing was that we didn't even try for Australian government funding as the town is in the wrong side of the wrong electorate. How sad that in Australia, over the last few years, the location politically determines if children can even have facilities. They don't, and they also don't have the guts to stand up in front of the children and say, because your town didn't vote for us, you're not getting a playground.
Bruce's
Shame
time
on you.
has expired. The question is that